There's an interesting discussion among some MPs at Westminster about whether you could have a kind of wipeout moment for the Tories, like happened with the Progressive Conservatives in Canada in 1993, where they went to just 2 MPs from having been the party of government under a first party to the post system.
But listen, maybe years from now, when the history books are written and the memoirs are on sale, buy one, get one free, we'll see Rishi Sunak knew the game was up at this stage, realised that he was destined to be remembered and blamed for the coming election defeat, as this or that Conservative locks horns in battle for the leadership and fights over the future identity of the party. Maybe, as it is, why not at least try, for the purpose of this conversation, to believe that Rishi Sunak does believe what he says when he says it's not over till it's over. But can the PM and his election team really mean it when they say, as they did last night to a gathering of Tory MPs, that last week's local election suggests we may be heading for an inconclusive general election and a hung parliament? And if they do believe that, and I know it was never the most plausible interpretation of those results, we can talk about that. It is harder to keep the faith today, with the latest polls showing a ginormous 30-point lead for Labour over the Tories. With the same polls saying people overwhelmingly expect Labour to take power with a majority of seats in the Commons, with only a quarter of Tory voters expecting a hung parliament. Now, did Natalie Elphicke's slightly weird transformation from right-wing Tory MP to Keir Starmer's newest recruit just reinforce the impression of another wheel coming off Rishi Sunak's wagon? I've got to say, I think for most people, it will have been about that. A lot of Labour MPs are not impressed, however, with their new colleague. I wonder what you think about this. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or maybe a voice note on WhatsApp to 0333 003 2353. Join in, tell me what you think. Adam, the polls are worsening. Another defecting MP. It really feels as if the fates are conspiring against the Prime Minister.
Well, it's certainly the same picture in the opinion polls. I mean, this is a record, although, as has been pointed out, there's another one also showing a massive Labour lead, but half the size. So I think that, the figures we have to take with a pinch of salt. But everybody, even those people who are clinging to the hung parliament narrative, i.e. including the Prime Minister, are now basically saying that at the worst, Labour will be the largest party in a hung parliament, which is, points towards the change of government, bearing in mind that number of people who would work with the Conservatives is very low. And that's really what is so unusual, that we are in this zone where nothing really has changed as far as public opinion for 2 years, that the local elections have pretty much confirmed what we all thought, which is that there is record low lack of support for the Conservatives, and Labour is doing well, but it is not really, except in this poll, blasting through to the sort of stellar areas which we saw under New Labour, because it seems to be that the mood of the electorate is negative against the Conservatives rather than positive.
Although to that, it could perfectly well be argued, and I think I would, that it is perfectly possible to have a thing you could call a lukewarm landslide.
Oh, yeah.
Because even the people, I agree, are not overwhelmingly in love with the Labour Party, there is a pretty settled view that they think absolutely nothing of the Conservative Party, which is enough on the numbers that we've seen, poll after poll after poll for a year, to suggest that if it was happening now, you would be looking at a very safe Labour majority. And to argue as Rishi Sunak, for reasons we understand, was doing with his Tory MPs last night, saying, look, mate's not over, could be a hung parliament, that just seems to be just so desperate.
But it's also quite interesting that in this latest poll, actually, Reform, who've been claiming they were doing terribly well,
have gone back a bit.
They've actually gone back a bit. And I think what is being focused on, but not perhaps examined as much as it would be, is the possible erosion of the Labour vote to the Greens. It's quite clear that some Corbynites now are moving across to the Greens, but also, what the impact of this Gaza effect will be on, probably only a handful of seats, but that may,
Well, it's not over till it's over.
Yeah.
Rachel, the Elphicke effect, what do you make of what's been going on there? I mean, it's antagonised some Labour MPs, that's for sure. In your judgment, was this a convert worth having?
I think it just adds to the sense that the wheels are falling off the Tory machine. I think, I don't think... She's said she's not going to stand at the next general election. it just is bad for Rishi Sunak. It's not particularly good for Keir Starmer, but it's bad for Rishi Sunak. And I think there is just a sense of that mood of change being needed. And I went to see Challengers, that tennis movie, at the weekend. And one of the characters, the Zendaya character, says tennis is a relationship. It's not really a game or a sport. And politics is like that too. Politics is a relationship between leaders and the electorate. And I think the electorate have just lost faith with the Conservative Party and its successive leaders.
Yeah,
and I think that's very hard to turn around. So everything then plays into that, whether
Yes.
that's Natalie Elphicke
Yes.
or, Tory rebellions or whoever's next to defect.
Yeah, I mean, any defection is going to cause a great flurry around Westminster. There's going to be fury on the side of the party that's been defected away from, and there's going to be a certain amount of resentment on the party that's been defected to see one of the enemies sit up in the rank and be made a fuss of by the leader in a way that they feel they really should have been made a fuss of in the past and haven't been. Adam, do you reckon this was a conversion worth having?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think for a number of reasons. Because Natalie Elphicke is a visible MP. She's, presentable mother, woman from Dover, so that clearly puts the focus back on, migration and basically her saying she's lost faith in what Rishi Sunak is trying to do on migration and has faith in what Keir Starmer is trying to do. I think that is good news. I think within Westminster there was quite a lot of hostility to her because when her former husband, Charlie Elphicke, was charged and ultimately convicted and sent to prison for sex offences, she initially supported him. Now, I'm not so sure out in the general public they won't sympathise with someone who initially supported her husband and then subsequently divorced him. So I think this is probably bigger than, for example, the Dan Poulter defection last week, although that touched on another issue of the NHS. And if, as he clearly is, Keir Starmer wants to appeal to Tory voters and centrist voters, I think she's quite a good figurehead. Yes. The one thing I would say that could go wrong is she's clearly a bit of a loose cannon. And if she starts saying silly things, then she could turn into a liability.
Yeah.
But they may sit on her. And it does turn out, oddly, who would have thought it, that she does have a relationship with John Healey, the Defence Secretary, because they both worked cross-party on housing issues, which, again, is another hot-button issue where Labour want to say they've got something to offer.
Yeah, indeed. And the more Labour voices kick off about this, then it starts to maybe seep into the public consciousness, and maybe there's a kind of an effect. But
she has issued an apology for what she said about.
Well, she has, and also that leap though from the right of the Tory party into Labour's ranks, which is just so weird looking, and Labour MPs hate that. If they keep on moaning, it keeps on getting the currency that it has been, then people might start thinking, what's going on here? As it is, I agree with you. I think it's a simple equation. You've got a Tory MP coming over. The Tories look as if a bit's fallen off. Job done until, of course, you get some trouble on the stump.
And Keir Starmer's got to win over Conservatives. That's the whole point of between now and the election. That's what Tony Blair did so brilliantly. That's why he got a landslide victory. And this is just totemic about his ability to do that. I remember interviewing him and saying, what did he think about those? Have you ever kissed a Tory badges? And he said, well, I couldn't wear one of those. I've kissed a Tory sort of thing.
Well, his father was a Tory.
Who?
Tony Blair.
Oh, no, I'm talking about Keir Starmer.
Oh, right.
No, Tony Blair, that was his sort of secret of his success, and he almost deliberately went out to woo Conservatives. Starmer hasn't been quite so overt about it, but I think he does feel that's one of the things he has and wants to achieve.
Yeah. Nothing can disguise the fact this is a bit of a headbutt.
Yeah, Neil Kinnock did that one better, didn't he? When he said
Neil Kinnock was
it's
we've
a
got to be
broad
careful when we
church,
bring
but
in.
even churches have walls.
Yeah, which is a very Neil Kinnock thing to say. One of the reasons that he's so loved in his party is that he has views like that. But of course, when it plays out in the polls or not, as at the moment I imagine it will not, you won't see too much of a ripple over this. Keir Starmer will think, as it were, job done. And what difference would it make?
The bigger problem is the Tory church. People are running out the door, left, right and centre, whether that's MPs, defecting, or MPs saying they're standing down at the next election, or voters apparently turning their back. There's an interesting discussion among some MPs at Westminster about whether you could have a kind of wipeout moment for the the Tories, like happened with the Progressive Conservatives in Canada in 1993, where they went to just 2 MPs from having been the party of government under a first party to the post system. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there is, I think, the chances of a hung parliament, Rishi Sunak, I don't think he really believes that. He's sort of living in cloud cuckoo land if he does think that.
Also, perhaps worth noting that there have, I think, now been 3 MPs, Conservative MPs, who've gone straight to the Labour Party. This is very similar to what we saw in '97 in the run-up to Tony Blair's landslide. We didn't see much movement either way for nearly 30 years in between. But 2 of those MPs, including Natalie Elphicke, are coming from constituencies which are almost, racing certs to fall to Labour.
There is an interesting contrast, whichever view you may take of it, and there's a contrast between the embracing of Natalie Elphicke and the fact that Diane Abbott, left-wing Labour MP, is still right out in the cold, with no obvious sign at the moment of her being allowed back in, which, that will cause resentment on the left of the party, and not just the left of the party in the Labour Party, but what it does illustrate, whatever you think, is that, they want to make a sign, they want to make a show, they wanted to show that left-wing are a thing of the past, and they're reaching out to the right of the electorate.
Well, they did let back in, they restored the to Osborne, didn't they?
They did, and one imagines that maybe Diane Abbott is going to be brought back in this side of the election, though you also think if they do that, they will do that with gritted teeth around Keir Starmer. But
it shows what his priority is. He's ruthless about targeting the centrist voters and the former Conservative voters. And meanwhile, you've got the coalition that Boris Johnson built up in 2019 for the Conservative Party has completely fragmented and fractured.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Labour is rebuilding the coalition that Tony Blair built.
I think if they were to bring back Diane Abbott, that would open up the question of Jeremy Corbyn, and absolutely, I got rid of Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, except because Diane Abbott apologised.
But they're closely associated. Yeah. She was his Shadow Home Secretary and all the rest of it, and I think that, and also, I mean, put it at its crudest, they are people who have had their political careers.
Yeah.
And therefore are more dispensable to
we didn't mention Nadeem Zahawi, who's become the 64th Conservative MP to say that he's quitting at the next general election. He's a big beast in the Tory ranks with a story behind him. But again, it just feeds the narrative, doesn't it, Rachel?
It's the rushing for the exit. Matt Chorley's running out of time for his exit interviews that he's doing with MPs. Rats deserting the sinking ship or whatever you want to use as the metaphor. But it does add to this sense of the whole thing slightly evaporating and collapsing for Rishi Sunak.